So welcome everybody. My name is Megan England. I am the branch manager at the Scottsville Library. And we are pleased to offer today this talk on local honey and my favorite creatures, bees, today presented by Heather Sturtzfer of the Scottsville Supply Company, which you will learn more about in just a moment. We'll do a short Q&A at the end. If you do have questions, you can just ask those through the chat function. And you can access the chat at the bottom of your Zoom window by clicking on that little speech bubble icon. And just a quick note that this program is going to be video recorded for possible inclusion on the JMRL YouTube channel, but don't worry, only the presenter and I will be recorded. So we will not be using your likeness or voice, and we will cut the recording off before the Q&A part. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Heather. Thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So hi folks, my name is Heather Sturtzer. I'm co-owner of Scottsville Supply Company, which is a small, locally owned beekeeping supply store down in Scottsville here in Admiral County. I'm just a backyard beekeeper. I started out with a couple beehives in my backyard in Scottsville and turned it into a passion and a business to help other folks either get into beekeeping brand new or better themselves as beekeepers if they were already managing bees in their own yard. So our business, if you've ever ventured into it or are interested in it, we teach classes. And usually they're in person, but right now due to novel coronavirus, we are offering online classes only. We have beekeeping supplies. You can get your hives down here. And then also in the spring, we bring in live bees so you can populate those hives as well. So that's about me. That's about our business. And you guys ready to talk about some honey? And Megan, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. You just give me some input if there's any issues with it. All right, so like any good class, we are going to be driven by some PowerPoint slides. And just a forewarning, a lot of the words on the slides are more for me and to help me talk to you guys about honey. Don't worry about trying to read them all, but if you're a true reader, go for it. There's lots of pretty pictures to be had. So this is all about the honey. So our agenda, these are the 4 things we're going to talk about. And we're going to start out with what exactly is honey and how is it made. And we're going to talk about that beekeeper's role in harvesting the honey, why we might use honey, and then some things to help you as a consumer as far as seeing a label on a jar of honey, whether it's in a grocery store, a farmer's market situation, or a small store like mine. What do we really want to look for when we're going out to buy honey? So what exactly is honey? Well, it starts out as nectar that the bees gather from our flowers. And flowers can be on little clovers that you see in the grass, to shrubs that are offering blooms, all the way up to our big tulip poplar trees. They have flowers on them. So honey is going to start out as nectar from any of those sources. And one really interesting note about, let's say, a tree that offers flowers and nectar. When you think about a tree and you look at it and you have this huge tulip poplar tree and you just got to crane your neck up to see it all, imagine laying that tree down flat in a field and picture it like a field of clover. That's really easy to see just how many flowers something offers. If you take a big tree and you lay it down flat, all those branches and leaves, and imagine how much space and how many flowers one single tree can actually offer a honeybee and other pollinators. As a food source. It's really kind of amazing. So honey starts out as nectar from these flowers, and nectar is pretty simple in itself. It's comprised of complex sugars, some minerals and nutrients, and a lot of moisture. But the picture that we're going to look at in the bottom of this slide shows a single honeybee on a single flower with some pollen on its leg, and it's actually drinking some nectar from that flower with its tongue. So it's going to gather that nectar and take it back to the hive. Now, nectar and honey are the main source of an adult honeybee's diet. It's what they eat. That's why they gather it. It's their food source. collectively for an entire colony, which can range up to 60, 70,000 individual honeybees. So they have a lot of food to collect in this manner. Why do we take it? Because it's a great sweetener, right? So we can use their food, and honey is actually the only food produced by an insect that humans can consume right from them. It's also a very adulterated and faked food in the world. The Border Patrol actually works really, really hard at all of our nation's ports and points of entry in order to check for fake food of all sorts. But they also look for barrels and barrels of fake honey. And this is why we're going to talk about labels at the end to help you buy honey in a smart way. So you don't get just high fructose corn syrup that's been flavored to taste like honey. So what makes up honey, starting from that nectar of complex sugars and moisture, is proteins. So honey actually has amino acids. And for those of you who can recall high school biology, or maybe in middle school or high school science class, know that amino acids are the building blocks of life. So they're really, really key to not only that insect, the honeybee's development, but when we consume it, it's also really good for us. And honey also has a concentration of minerals and vitamins, some of which include the B complex, C, D, and E vitamins. So it's an amazing little sweetener. It's better than just simple cane sugar that you might use on a regular basis, day-to-day basis. So it gives you a little bit more than just plain sugar does. All right, so that's a little bit about what exactly honey is. Let's check out a little bit more about how the bees actually go and gather and find the honey out in the real world. So we're going to see a video of this in a minute. So the Waggle Dance is how they go out and find it. Now, if you remember just a few minutes ago, I mentioned that a honeybee colony may be comprised of 60 to 70,000 individual bees, but only a portion of those bees actually fly out of the house at any one time. Maybe 10, 20,000 bees, that's it, are going to hit the highway during the day, and they're going to go out and seek food sources. And some of these bees, we actually call them scout bees out of that 10 or 20,000. They go out exploring and looking for new food sources, whether it's nectar or pollen. And then they rush back to the hive, and they want to communicate to their sisters, the other field forager bees that are going to go out and collect food, where to find this food. And the way they do that is they actually use the sun, because it's a known item, and their hive, which you can see in this picture, because that's a known location. And if anybody understands much about navigation, to find a third unknown point, you just have to start with 2 known points. And I won't go into navigation too much, but these bees have an amazing ability to use the sun, their hive location, to go find food in a different direction and at a different distance. A question I get asked a lot is, how far does a bee fly to find food? Well, they can fly 50 yards, but they can actually fly up to 5 miles to find a food source. And picture in your mind 5 miles out in a straight line, and then picture that in a full circle of 360-degree possibilities of straight lines from their hive. And we have an area that I don't want to try to run. It's an enormous amount of area that bees can actually go and look for food around their house, the hive. And they use the Waggle Dance in order to help each other get to a specific food location in that huge area. And they are so good at this Waggle Dance, they're actually going to be able to get each other within about 50 yards of that food source, like a field of clover or a stand of tulip poplar trees. And some of this Waggle Dance is performed in a figure-8 motion. So this is just a simple diagram that shows you a direction, the first line of it, which is going to tell them which direction to fly based on their house and the sun. And then they do a loop, and the squiggly line in that middle, that squiggly line in the middle actually tells them how far to go based on how fast they're actually going through that squiggly motion. And it'll also tell them how plentiful this food source is during this process. So they do a little figure eight. And oh, by the way, this is all happening in a hive or in a tree hollow where there's no light. Okay, no, they actually don't like a lot of natural light in their house, unlike us. We don't supply them with electricity to flip the switch on for the overhead light in their hives when we manage them. So they're doing this a lot on just the vibrations that they put off through that wing fluttering and that movement. They're very sensitive little creatures. So they're getting all this information in the waggle dance in the dark. So when they go out and forage, and they have to bring that honey back to them when they found that field of clover that they were sent to go get, this is just a simple picture of the internal anatomy of a honeybee. And this top picture is when a honeybee does not have any nectar in what we call its honey crop. So if we look from left to right, we see the bee is made up of 3 different body segments. We have a head. That middle smaller segment is called the thorax. I kind of think about that as their back. And then the bottom segment on the right, the last segment, is where all their internal organs are stored. So we can see from the top picture and the bottom picture, we have one section at the beginning of their abdomen that is small at the top and then enlarged in the bottom, and that's called their honey crop. When they go and land on that flower and they use their tongue and they drink a bunch of nectar, they're filling that honey crop. And the honey crop actually sits above a one-way valve to the digestive system. So nectar never actually enters a bee's true stomach or digestive system. It sits in a little holding tank, safely and securely. And this little holding tank adds enzymes and starts to work our nectar to the end product of honey. So we're going to go through the tongue, through the esophagus, down into a honey crop, and that's a storage hole back to the house. Okay, so Megan, I'm just gonna swap over to a video, and you just let me know if our video does not like to be shown on your end, and we will try again. So we're gonna actually watch the video from National Geographic about the waggle dance in the hive. And I'm gonna go ahead and make it enlarge and hit play, and hopefully you guys can all
The hive is hungry. Some 30,000 honeybees need pollen. Now, a single jar of the honey you can buy in any store requires 1 million flower visits. Scouts disperse several miles in each direction, searching for untapped fields. This scout makes a promising find. Pollen sacs bulge from her legs, but she can't harvest all of it herself. She needs help, lots of it. She spreads the news of her find by dancing. This waggle dance is based on a figure 8. The scout moves at an angle, waggles, reverses direction, and waggles some more. Her flower point presentation has to communicate 3 things. First, she moves at an angle. The angle indicates the direction of the flowers in relation to the sun. The hive's honeycombs are built vertically, so straight up means towards the sun, down means away from the sun, and so on. Second, distance. She waggles her abdomen rapidly. The more she waggles, the further the distance. Third, flower type. The pollen she collected provides a scent cue for the others to smell for. Her presentation is a success. Several sisters return with her to forage in the field. They, in turn, will bring back more pollen and spread the word until the hive is finally full.
Okay, So hopefully that was a little better explanation than what I can do with slides. And again, that's all in the dark. There's a little light done for the video in that, but it is an amazing process that they can communicate to each other so effectively. Just want to show you what we know as honey in a jar, so then we can talk about it in the hive a little bit. When you go to the store, you're buying honey that's already jarred, and we just simply call this liquid honey. About 100 years ago, you could only buy honey that came in the comb. So we had some inventions to spin out our honey out of a honeycomb into just a liquid state, and then we can bottle it into a jar. But this is more of what honey looks like in the hive versus the bottle that you're going to get. I'm going to screen share again. And I apologize for the doorbell. We are open, and that is our curbside pickup occurring to let somebody have us come out and help them. Okay, so back to slide. So we know what honey looks like when we buy it in the store. This is a picture of what, as a beekeeper, I'm going to call a frame that holds honeycomb. The wood part on the top and bottom, you can see in the picture, there's wood pieces on the end to hold everything in place. The bees build their honeycomb made of beeswax inside of this wood frame, and then they fill it with nectar and honey. And if we look at the honeycomb, the bottom half of this picture looks different from the top half. The bottom half, the cells are open, and we can see a little bit of glistening liquid looking back at us. That is nectar. The top half of this picture might look a little weird, but it's actually all those cells, honeycomb, covered with a very thin layer of wax. And under that wax, in those cells, is actually honey. So the bottom is nectar, the top is honey. And there's a big difference that we have to know as beekeepers in order to supply you with honey between the two. And the big difference is actually water content. Nectar, if you remember at the beginning, I said it contains complex sugars, moisture, some water content, and some enzymes and minerals and vitamins. Well, honey is simple sugars, a little bit of water and moisture content, and all of those minerals and nutrients that we're looking for still. Nectars can range from flower to flower between 20% water content all the way up to 80% water content. So there's a lot of water contained in nectar. Honey contains between 17 and 18% water content. The bees actually reduce down moisture, getting water out of nectar to make that honey really, really thick. It pours really hard out of a jar, really slowly. And between the moisture content of 17 and 18%, we actually have perfect honey that will last thousands and thousands of years if it's stored properly. A few years back, if you're old enough to remember, a few years back, we actually pulled out honey from an Egyptian tomb that was sealed properly in a pot, and it was still good. It had not gone bad. And that's because the Egyptian beekeepers knew that they're going to harvest what we call honey when all those cells are capped over and not open like the bottom half of this frame, but all their honeycomb cells are capped over, meaning there's all perfect honey behind there. And they sort it properly with a good jar that's sealed, and no water went back in. Not that there's a lot of humidity in Egypt like there is here right now, but we don't want moisture content added back to our honey. So it stayed at 17, 18% moisture content, and it was perfect. They tried it. I wish I could have tried it. So that's really important for the beekeeper to know, that I want all of my honeycomb that I am robbing and stealing, because that's what I'm doing out of a hive, to be capped over with a thin little layer of beeswax like we see in this picture, That way I know it's perfect honey. If I were to pull a bunch of honeycomb that looked like the bottom half of this picture, there's way too much moisture in there, and all my honey would ferment and go bad, probably in a matter of weeks. And that doesn't make very good Christmas gifts when all your honey is soured. So in our area, here's a list of the major plants that offer us large amounts of nectar for our bees to produce large amounts of honey. So it's kind of done chronologically, but blackberries are really almost weeds around here that they grow really well on tree lines and in some fields. Clover, of course, is prevalent all throughout the US and definitely here. Our big tulip poplar trees offer large amounts of nectar for the bees to turn into honey. And then we have some lesser available trees, but still around, basswood, sourwood, and then some plants later in the year, thistles and aster. Goldenrod can offer a little bit of nectar for us here as well. So this is the timeline that these plants come into bloom, starting in March, and they have their own bloom periods. But if you ever want to know what can I plant for bees to help them, these are some great nectar providers. As long as you don't mind clover being in your lawn, let it grow up. Cut your grass a little higher. Wait another week to cut the grass. It's a great bee food. You're going to see lots of pollinators on clover. So I have to touch on where Virginia ranks in honey production in the US. Because I just gave you a whole list of great honey providing plants for us. But as a state, Virginia is actually pretty low on the list when it comes to the amount of honey that our honeybee colonies are able to produce in a single season. We rank in the last 10, give or take the year, of states in the US. We might only pull, as a beekeeper, 35 to 40 pounds of honey per honeybee colony each year. And there's lots of factors that go into how much and if it's going to happen every year. And a lot of it has to do with how good of a beekeeper I can be and keeping my bees healthy in today's harsh world. And also weather, which I can't control at all. We need average rainfalls. I don't want to be in a drought. I don't want to be weeks upon weeks of downpours. But the states above, really interesting. North Dakota, South Dakota, California, Montana, and Florida actually are the best states if you want to go make lots and lots of honey with your bees. So North and South Dakota, there's like half a person every 500 square miles or something like that. I'm just kidding, there's more than that. But the less dense population of North Dakota, South Dakota, and perhaps Montana can offer why we still see lots and lots of wildflowers in those regions versus states that are heavily populated, lots of dense cities, lots of asphalt, concrete, and pavement going down, that our pollinators and honeybees have less of a foraging environment to go out and eat food on. And Florida just happens to be a great state for honey. It's a mixture of populated and rural area, but they have a lot of agriculture out there and plants that they're growing that offer a lot of nectar. Orange blossom, honey, tupelo honey, excuse me. And just a lot of agriculture that goes on in that state that bees assist with and that give, in turn, a lot of nectar back to the bees. So the last thing on this slide, which is really interesting to think about, is the average honey yield per colony in the US. So way back in 1993, I wasn't even thinking about bees in 1993. The average colony produced about 260 pounds of honey. That's a lot of honey. But in 2017, that dropped all the way down to less than 150 pounds per colony. It's a huge difference, and a huge difference because we're still growing as a human population. And like I mentioned before about North and South Dakota, we're growing and growing, and we're taking over more land space, and we're losing land space for all of our little critters out there. And it's harder today to keep bees healthy and alive and in a state where they can produce a lot of honey, because there's a lot of harsh things going on in the world for bees. Okay, so a little bit fun facts there. Okay, my role as a beekeeper. So, of course, bees live in the wild, not as many as there used to be, which is why we want more beekeepers out there to help the honeybees. But my job to help with honey production, so you can get some honey, is I need to properly place my hives, maybe near food sources, lots of tulip poplars, blackberries, fields of clover. And of course, the closer my hives are to those fields of clover, the more honey I'm going to get. If my bees have to fly 3 miles from hive to clover, I don't get as much honey from it because they're actually eating a little bit of the nectar on the flight back. They got to have some energy to fly back. So the closer my bees are, maybe within a half a mile of that field of clover, the less nectar they have to consume on the flight back to the hive, the more honey that I get in the end. The colony management, which I've bolded on this slide, again, goes back to my role as the beekeeper. And I'm not going to so much go into colony management. I'll save that for Beekeeping 101 or my beginner beekeeping class, because there's a lot that goes into managing honeybees in today's world. In Central Virginia, I also need to be cognizant of removing boxes of honey from my hives. And if you can see in the picture on this slide, those are actual honeybee hives with each one of those tall stacks has one honeybee colony occupying it. And the top half of those boxes are full of honey, and the bottom half are more the house and crib, a little bit of kitchen cabinets going on. So bees raise lots of bees every day to replace a workforce that is wearing out every day. And this location, this is actually one of my employees' hives that I helped her pull just an insane amount of honey off her hives. Was awesome. It had lots and lots of great plants, great weather that year, very healthy bees that year. And it was just a perfect storm for these gigantic honeybee hives. Normally you don't see this. I would usually call this showing off. Normally our hives are much shorter in stature and fewer boxes. But we're gonna pull all these boxes off, usually by July 4th to harvest our honey. Because if you've lived in Central Virginia for very long, you know that July, August, and September can be very hot, as we are in right now, and a lot of times very, very dry. We'll end up in droughts. There will be water restrictions if you live in the city. You can't wash your car, you can't water your lawn, and all these things because we just are not seeing the rainfall that allows plants to thrive. And when plants don't get moisture content, don't get rain, they're not giving out any of that nectar because that's moisture, right? That has water in it. They're going to hold on to it for their own survival. One of my roles is to actually process the honey out of the picture of the honeycomb, that frame of honey, and put it into a bottle for you. And then, of course, I need to be able to sell my honey in a way, and those are my roles. I'm sure you guys are coming up with a bazillion questions that you're going to ask me at the end of this. This is a lot of words on this slide. But why do we use honey? I mentioned way at the beginning of the presentation that, of course, we're using it as a sweetener. As humans, we're taking an insect's real adult food and using it as a sweetener. Before cane sugar was readily available throughout the world, honey was used as a sweetener. Many, many cultures throughout the world have had beekeeping as a part of their way of life. So it was just part of it. They used honey for a sweetener. They used the beeswax from a hive for candles because there wasn't electricity back in the day. Lots of goodness that came out of beehives. What they also learned back in the day that we have forgotten about a little bit in today's modern way is that honey actually has a medicinal and healing purpose as well. It can act as a broad spectrum antibiotic, has antimicrobial properties, and physicians back in the day used to prescribe it their little prescription notes signed and everything for things like sore throats, colds, flu. It's really great against ulcers because ulcers tend to be a variety of strains of bacteria, not just one. It heals wounds really well. And one of the ways that the reasons it is such a good medicinal property, wound healer, is it actually contains hydrogen peroxide. And if you know, if you go get a cut outside, you got to grab that brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide from under the sink and splash some on, let it fizz. And we're immediately killing bacteria when we do that. And oh, by the way, I'm not a doctor, so please, please use all this with caution and consult a medical person other than me. So we used to see prescriptions written, and it would be whiskey, lemon, and honey that they wanted you to make a little drink out of. If you had a cold or flu or maybe a stomach ulcer, maybe less on the whiskey if you had a stomach ulcer. And that would be something that a doctor would write on a prescription note and prescribe to you. And most folks had all that stuff in the house already. We may all have that stuff in the house already. So it makes a good little home remedy. And I mentioned earlier that it is a healthy alternative to just regular table sugar because it contains proteins and vitamins. And what we understand about honey is the darker the honey, the better it is for us, the more it contains. And we kind of see this in other food groups too, like blueberries. It's a very dark fruit and it is high in antioxidant content. Buckwheat, as an example on the slide, is one of the best. But I will say, because I am not a doctor still, that honey is not a replacement for fruits or vegetables. Eat your veggies. Okay. So honey labels. What do you need to know as a consumer of honey to buy the best honey for yourself, but not be fooled, okay? Local honey, that is the rave and crave and everything for today. Buy local, shop local, local honey for allergies. Local's in the eye of the beholder. So the USDA has a very broad definition of local, and buyers have a very narrow definition of local. So if somebody comes down to Scottsville and visits me at my store and says, hey, I want some local honey, they're probably from Scottsville, and they're looking for something right here, maybe 3 miles this way, 3 miles this way. The USDA, if they walk into my store and say, hey, do you have any local honey? They're like, sure. And I can hand them a bottle all the way down to South Carolina and Tennessee and probably up to Pennsylvania. That's their spectrum of local when it comes to honey because of plant species. If people are buying local honey for allergies, you're buying it for the plant species that are bothering you. And those plant species actually grow in a much greater area than just Scottsville. So keep that in mind. The next thing to talk about is raw and unprocessed. So raw and unprocessed means absolutely zero heating, zero filtering. And if it's the right combination of nectars, it has a high tendency to crystallize, and we're going to talk about crystallization in just a second. So you should see a lot of extra bits and junk in your honey if it is truly raw, meaning there should be some wax, maybe a bee wing, maybe an oops from the hive. Most people don't actually want unprocessed honey for liquid honey. They usually want it a little bit cleaner than that. So we're going to go with a raw light process, meaning still unheated, unpasteurized. It's just been run through a simple filter to catch any bits of wax or bee wings or legs that might have come through the process. Natural honey, it actually has no true meaning. It should just be real honey taken from a hive by a beekeeper who knew what they were doing, and nothing should be altered or added to it. Different varieties of honey you may see on a label. I'm going to hold these up and probably be really impossible to see, but I have two different honeys. One is a organic tropical honey and one is a orange blossom honey. And orange blossom honey is a unifloral, a single plant species honey, where the bees were placed in groves of oranges down in Florida to pollinate those orange groves And they made boxes and boxes of honey that we pulled off the hive at the conclusion of that pollination. Usually local honey from me or a local beekeeper, we're going to call it wildflower honey or spring blossom honey or summer honey or fall honey, because we just have bees in our backyard. They go out and fly and they touch whatever plants they touch, and I don't know where the heck they are. I don't have tracking beacons on them. They're not GPSed. And they could be hitting blackberries one day, clover another day, big tulip poplars the third day, and mixing it all into one frame. Remember that wood frame that contains our honeycomb? And it's just a variety. It's a mixture. And I actually think that's some of the best honey, because I get a variety of amino acids, a variety of vitamins, and a great blended flavor. So that's the kind of different varieties that we can see. No labels on a jar of honey. I'm gonna hold this up. So no labels means please don't buy it. Things tend to need to be labeled if you're buying food. This is gonna be a gift from me to my family, so they don't expect me to have pretty labels on it. But we don't really ever wanna buy unlabeled honey. We don't know what's going on with it. We don't know the source of it. We don't know what's it comprised of. We don't know how it's processed. Lots of unknowns there. So the last thing on this slide is talking about USDA organic. So organic honey in the US is really, really difficult to find, if not impossible to find. Because if you think about our world and the way that we do landscaping and agriculture today, if I plop a beehive in the middle of that orange grove for an orange farmer down in Florida, I can expect that he is going to spray his orange grove with some sort of insecticide to keep bugs off of his plants so they'll grow healthy. Well, an insecticide is a chemical, and my honey from there would no longer be considered organic. And the amount of pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, list goes on and on, that we use in the US makes it really impossible for us to say that we have organic honey, because remember, how far do our bees fly? That's right, one of you said it. Up to 5 miles in a big circle. That's a big area, okay? It's really hard to control that space, and landowners don't tend to have that much land. Organic honey, even with the USDA label, is likely a product out of another country, which is fine. They've gone through the certification process and they've obtained the seal from the USDA. We see this largely out of South America and other countries that just have less developed and less chemical use than we do. So those are important labels for you to know. We're gonna jump on to our last topic here, Megan. So this is gonna be our last slide. And I just wanna talk about honey crystallization before we get done and start taking questions in it, from those that are attending. Honey crystallization comes up quite a bit when we're looking to buy honey. And I'm gonna do one of these horrible, I'm gonna hold these up to my screens. And I don't know if you guys can see it in the little pictures. So this little guy is crystallized, and you can see this one is liquid as it still pours. So honey crystallization is actually normal, but it varies honey to honey. It's normal because our honey, that simple sugar composition, is made up of glucose and fructose. And now I'm going to take you to either high school chemistry or beyond high school chemistry. And I didn't take beyond high school chemistry, so we're going to make this very simple. So glucose is what we're worried about when we talk about crystallization. So glucose and water, because remember there's water in our honey, bond. They have a very weak chemical bond. And when they sit for too long, maybe a day, maybe a month, maybe a year, that chemical bond between glucose and water simply breaks. And if you have ever cooked anything in a kitchen, you're actually a chemist, okay? And we can put this chemical bond back together with a little bit of heat. That's all it takes, is just a little bit of heat. And it only takes between about 95 and 104 degrees heat, maybe in a pot of warm water that you've heated up on the stovetop to be a chemist. You put your glass jar of honey down into that pot of warm water between 95 and 104 degrees, and you take crystallized glucose and water have broken, that chemical bond, heated it, and it goes back together. And then it goes liquid again. Over time, will that chemical bond break again when it's room temperature? Absolutely, every day of the week. Drives you crazy. But crystallized honey makes it a lot easier and less messy to spoon and put into hot tea. So there's always a silver lining on it. Honeys that crystallize pretty quickly: clover, goldenrod, thistle. They'll crystallize sometimes before we can get it out of the hive, which is really an annoyance to beekeepers. Honey that stays liquid for years and years and years: sourwood, orange blossom, tulip poplar, and one of the most famous, which I somehow left off this slide, is Tupelo honey, which is largely produced in the panhandle of Florida. To reduce crystallization from happening naturally, you can store your honey above 77 degrees, or actually freeze it. Honey doesn't freeze, but we want to get it, we don't want to sit in a range of 50 to 60 degrees. 50 to 60 degrees will cause your honey to crystallize rapidly. And it may actually cause honey that wouldn't normally crystallize to just go ahead and crystallize, because that just is a really poor temperature range to store honey at. So not in your canning cellar, or not in your basement. Best storage place is in the cabinet, probably near the stove where it gets some heat. And again, that we can dissolve the crystals and make it fully liquid in a little while. And I mentioned honey has a moisture content between 17 and 18%. Anything above 18%, too much water, and it will ferment. And again, those are poor Christmas gifts to give when they give fermenting honey. Okay. So Megan, I am done with the slideshow presentation and almost out of words.
I have plenty of words for you. So it looks like we have some great questions to kick us off. If we go back a little bit to your talk about the health benefits of honey, we had a question: what is buckwheat exactly, refined or unrefined? And then talking about the different shades of honey. Why is some light and others dark? Okay,
so let me see if I understand the question about buckwheat. It's just a simple cover crop plant. It's a really good nectar source, and it can produce a lot of nectar for the bees, which they then turn into honey. And so, do you know who asked that question, and if we're going to get?
Yeah, it was Tom, but I wonder if was it that buckwheat honey is a higher in amino acids, maybe, or was it healthier?
Yeah, again, forgive me for not being a true scientist or chemist or biologist, that it just contains a high level of antioxidants, that nectar. Each nectar offers its own levels, and there's so many different elements that make up honey, from those sugars to the vitamins to the amino acids. And you totally got me. I don't know which one of those holds antioxidants, but yeah. So
on it anyway.
Yep. So, we always, if you think about plating food, you don't want a plate of food that is all white, mashed potatoes, maybe corn, and something else. You tend to want a plate of food that has a lot of color in it, a lot of dark greens, some carrots. And that's how we think about the shades of our honey too. The darker usually tends to add more value. Lighter honeys, while still going to have the amino acids and going to have the vitamins, they're just not as plentiful. So clover honey, for instance, is a light honey. Blackberry honey, which is what I think most of this is, it's still good, but buckwheat honey is really, really dark, and it just has more value to it. And the different shades of honey is just based on the plant nectar. And when you have a blend, it tends to just be in the middle. And if you want to be a honey connoisseur, think about it like a beer connoisseur. Are you a light amber girl or a dark amber girl when it comes to flavor? Because the lighter colors, shades of nectar, therefore honey, tend to have their own distinctive flavors, and darker honeys have their own distinctive flavors.
Well, that's interesting. I am going to have to sample a whole bunch of different honeys now. I'm curious. Yeah, it looks like we did get clarification. So buckwheat is a type of honey from the nectar of one specific plant, the buckwheat cover crop.
Correct.
Got it. So the next question that came up was, how long do bees live?
So when we think about bees, I wish it was a simple answer. Here goes my 5-minute answer. So worker bees, which are your infertile females that do all the work in the house, take care of the babies, take out the trash, go grocery shopping, go forage on the flowers. During the spring and summer, they only live about 4 to 6 weeks. That's it, 4 to 6 weeks. Now over the winter, there's not as many chores to do. There's not a lot of babies to take care of. The grocery stores are closed, plants don't offer anything, they're closed up for the season. So they live 4 to 6 months because that wear and tear is less on their bodies. Now, the one bee that is the heart and soul of our colony, the queen bee, she actually lives 2 to 5 years. We don't want a replacement of the one bloodline in our colony every 4 to 6 weeks or 4 to 6 months. So she has the physiology to actually live for years.
Very cool. Couple questions about your honey business. And real quick, if there's anybody else that has questions, you can just type those into chat real quick and we'll get to those. You can just click the speech bubble icon down at the bottom of your Zoom window. So the honey that you sell at your shop, do you sell it on the internet so that it can get shipped to people? And what is your favorite honey that you sell?
Oh, coronavirus and not coming to stores. Ugh. So we don't tend to put a lot of our honey on our e-commerce site. We do have a full e-commerce site. It's just driven towards our beekeeping equipment because that's, if I look at my store right now, 80% of what I look at. So our jars of honey, we tend to, before coronavirus, just sell to walk up. We have a honey tasting bar that I'm actually sitting at right now where you can sample, kind of like a wine or a beer flight. Maybe soon. Thank you for calling me out on not having honey on my website for shipping. Our local honey will never be on the website because it goes too quickly and it's very dependent on beekeepers walking up and selling me excess honey. I don't tend to do a lot of honey myself. My landscape, I live 10 minutes from downtown Scottsville, does not support a large amount of honey production. But my favorite honey would be sourwood honey, made from the sourwood tree. Just a great flavor. I don't carry it though.
I think your internet glitched a little bit. What was the name of that honey that was your favorite?
Sourwood.
Sourwood. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think my internet glitched because we're getting a call to the store.
Hey, that's a good thing. And, you know, if folks are not already Scottsville residents, then I guess you just have a great excuse to come on down and visit Scottsville sometime once, you know, things are open and that's the thing we can do again.
Yeah.
Is there one honey that is better for sweetening than others?
That's a really great question. So I always think about it as what I'm sweetening. If I'm sweetening my ginger hot tea, I go for orange blossom honey because it is not overly sweet, has a pretty mild flavor and doesn't take over my honey. But there's also honey out there that we just generically call baker's honey. If you want to bake with honey, you're going to use a slightly different recipe than what your sugar is going to call for. Like if you have a recipe that calls for 1 cup sugar, you're going to use 3/4 cup honey. And then you're going to have to take out some of the water content elsewhere, like because you're adding a lot of water to that mixture. They have baker's honey. And so restaurants and people that use honey on a large scale to bake with, they're going for a more bland flavor honey. Something that you and I wouldn't just spoonful, you know, chow down on when we have a craving of honey because it just doesn't have that great, huge flavor. But yeah, so it depends on what you're going for, I guess. That's not an easy answer because every honey tastes different.
Well, based on what you just said, I'm sure there are many answers to this question, but can you go back again to what we should look for when we're buying honey in the grocery store?
Yeah, so look for where the honey is a product of. You know, having a US-based product means that the adulteration is probably non-existent. It's true honey. When we start having honey imported from outside countries, we know through Border Patrol activity and seizures that there are barrels and barrels of high fructose corn syrup coming in under the label of honey. And it's just been blended to the right color, to the right thickness, to the right flavor, and all you're doing is buying high fructose corn syrup. So look for where it's a product of. Make sure that it is raw honey. It can have some filtering, but a raw honey means that it's not heated. When you heat honey, and it's gone through a pasture, it's been pasteurized, if I'm saying that word right. Heating actually takes out a lot of those key elements that we're looking for the health benefit of having honey versus just regular cane sugar. So we don't want heated, so we want a raw, and just being mindful of if it's a US honey or not. Doesn't mean that it's adulterated if it comes from another country. The risk is just there.
Well, this is a perfect question for you. We have somebody who is interested in beekeeping and would love to know what she's getting into, and where can she go to learn more?
So you're getting into more than you expect, I can guarantee that. I would encourage you to talk with us, and that can be a conversation over phone or email through our store, Scottsville Supply. We also have an online beginner beekeeping class available that you can purchase through our e-commerce website. And it's an on-demand, do-at-your-own pace, similar to what we did here, presentation. And maybe this winter, if coronavirus is beat back enough and we feel comfortable hosting in-person classes, we will go back to also having in-person classes on education in Scottsville.
And I just shared the link in the chat if anybody wants to head over to the Scottsville Supply Company website. I'm sure a lot of that information is there, and you can learn how to get in contact with Heather and learn all about what they offer down there at the shop. I think that is the last of our questions, but we got some thank yous. So yeah, thank you so much, Heather, for talking to us today. Really appreciate it. Please do check out the Scottsville Supply Company website, scottsvillesupplyco.com. And if you haven't been down to downtown Scottsville, we're a real cute little town. There's lots of great places to eat. We hope you'll come see us when it's safe to do so. And we do have another program coming up tomorrow. That's Thursday, July 9th at 10 a.m., featuring another local Scottsville business, and that is Balance Yoga Studio. We're going to be doing chair yoga, which is a more accessible approach to yoga. So tell your friends. Thanks again for joining us today. Any last words, Heather, before we sign off today?
No, I appreciate you guys attending. And not only is it just our store that's available to help you get into beekeeping, there's actually beekeeping clubs. There's a bunch of us beekeeping nerds out there that get together and talk about this stuff on a monthly basis when there's not coronavirus. So there's one in Charlottesville, one in Buckingham, one in Nelson, and throughout the entire area. There's tons of clubs. Google.
I love it. Can't wait. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Heather, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.